seems like all of them had real jobs. And not just jobs, but jobs that they went to school for and loved. I had to stop going on Facebook for a while because it hurt too much to see my friends doing so well when I felt like such a loser and a failure and all alone. I didn't want to go to church, especially when I felt so different from everyone else my age. It's also difficult when you're sleeping at that time. It was really painful, though, to respond when people asked, what job? What job did you get? You're home, you graduated, what are you doing now? Well, I'm learning how to sleep again, and that's pretty much taking up all my time. And it's really difficult to make friends when you're afraid of people finding out who you are and what you're struggling with. There was such a cognitive dissonance for me when I started off wanting to be a pastor, not just wanting, but knowing that that was what I was going to do. And now I'm not even shaking my fist at God, I've completely turned my back on him. So when I think back to our calling series here, I had my calling, pastor. That was me. I feel like it was taken away from me. I didn't give it up. I didn't say, this isn't worth it, or it's too much work, or I don't believe in God. I just was completely removed from that option for that time. Now I feel like I need to find my calling all over again, because I don't feel like God cares anymore to lead me. I don't trust that God cares enough about me to send me a good plan. Why would I want to serve a God who I feel abandoned me during this time, or didn't care enough to send me friends to help me when I felt my most alone? Sort of feels like when you're hurt by that friend who's not really a friend. They do something that's so unhealthy and crosses the boundaries. Like, you don't go after them and try to fix that relationship you learned. That was a negative influence, and I'm not going to spend time or energy on that. That's how I feel right now about God. I feel the same way. If someone has hurt me so much, or, in my opinion, didn't care enough to help me, why would I spend time trying to follow them closer, to find a calling that would serve him, so I could get hurt more? However, the same friend I was talking to last night said something that made me feel uncomfortable, which proves how close of a friend she is to say that. She said that she still feels like I have some hope in God. And that's true. Like, if tomorrow I would learn that all of these struggles meant that I'd helped someone else or could have made a difference in someone's life, I'd be okay with it. It had a purpose, I have closure, let's move on and keep serving. However, that hasn't happened yet, and I don't trust God enough yet to feel like it will happen. Today in Vern's sermon, he mentioned the cultural wars. And when I think about the questions and answers that Shelley and I are going to talk about, I feel like this very much forays into the area of age wars. When you see someone in their 20s and they're not going to church, that leads me. We went through those same struggles, but we didn't just quit, we kept going. And so I feel like when the people are willing to share these struggles, it's met with resistance. Like, you just didn't try hard enough. You didn't show up enough, you didn't pray enough, you just bailed. You don't deserve this community anymore. And that's something I hope that we can work together on. And it's something I've really been impressed with at Zumbro, the intergenerational groups that we have. I just hope we can do it in a way that brings in everyone and their doubts and brings us all closer to God without alienating or hurting or judging anyone.
Thanks, Ashley. Have a seat. Let me start by saying you're very brave. As someone who has also struggled with doubt, I know it's a really hard place to admit that you're not quite sure always where God is in the middle of things. And I think a sign of maturity is being willing to say, I don't know, and I'm not sure. And maybe the God that's there has been absent from your life, but as I hear you talking, I also hear that you've got such a strong sense of God's identity somewhere. So I want to start by asking you, if one of your friends were to ask you, who do you think God is, where would you start? What would you say? Who is God to you today?
Well, this has been one of the biggest struggles because I feel like God has left me. But if one of you were to come up and say, oh, I don't feel him anymore, he doesn't care, I'd be like, no, he loves you, he's so there for you, don't give up. I totally believe who the Bible says he is. I just can't apply that to myself right now because of how I'm feeling. So it may sound contradictory, but that's how it feels.
That sense that God is present but not present, does that disconnect what's hardest for you, or does it come out in other ways?
I think that's certainly a hard part when you feel like you see him working in other people's lives who have similar struggles, and you see him communicating with them and sending people into their lives. I think one of the biggest problems is the guilt, though, because I think there are people who've had worse struggles than me, and they grew closer to God in that time. So what am I doing wrong that I have this anger? Because it's okay to say, I don't know. It's not okay to say, I'm ticked off at God and I don't care. And that's what I'm sharing with you all today. I think that's been the hardest struggle, is feeling that guilt.
So why do you think it's not okay to say you're angry at God?
I think in certain circumstances it's okay, but you need to have a caveat after that says, I'm so mad at God, but I know this is all going to work out. Right now, all I can see is the anger. And then when I look at the people I'd mentioned who had struggled with mental illness or job loss, and I think, that's someone I love. You hurt someone I love. That's what I can't reconcile.
I know in terms of reading scripture, it's one thing to say as a Christian you're supposed to always believe in God's providence and God's goodness all the time, but especially in reading the Psalms, the psalmists were pretty mad at God a good lot of the time. And one of the richness and depth that comes from reading the Psalms is that you have people who are shaking their fists. God, why are you absent from me? God, don't you care at all? God, where are you when I need you? And I don't know if we read those enough in church. And maybe it's one of those ways that as a church we need to acknowledge that people in our pews, lots of whom find great depth and strength from faith, but there are plenty of people in the pews who are really struggling, trying to figure it out.
And off of that, I think we read those now. I think the people who were expressing that in the Bible weren't very popular to have those doubts. But now, hindsight, we can understand that and appreciate it. So when someone shares where they're feeling and they don't need to necessarily hear, I feel that way too, but if at least they're not judged, I think we can get somewhere. And I think that's why, especially 20-somethings who greatly have these doubts and feelings, when they feel pushed away instead of, well, let's talk about that, that just furthers the problem.
So talk a little bit about the church and this journey for you. You grew up in a congregation, very involved, very active, and yet as you've grown, it seems that relationship has kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your life with the church and what it means to you.
Well, I still love church. I was very excited when I came here. I met with Shelly, and she said, hey, we're loading a container that's going to go to Tanzania. Maybe you could help. And that developed into going to Tanzania because it sounded so exciting, and that's how I like to serve. I think there's something very special about the church, and if it's a place where you feel safe and you feel like you have relationships that don't just end when the service is over, that is one of the best things that you can have in your life. I think the problem comes when you feel different from everyone else, whether it's because of your age or your struggles, and you don't feel like there's connections beyond just coming and sitting near someone during that 60-minute service. I also think it's difficult when people blame the issues on the church and push it up to God, like, well, this church judged me, so God's awful and I'm not going to deal with it. But I really think it's more, especially for 20-somethings, feeling like they have a place to be. They feel out of place when they walk in. They don't see anyone like them. They don't see a lot of welcome extended towards them, besides the ushers or someone welcoming them, but there's not a reconnection afterwards or an expression of, we want to see you again. You bring value to us. It's more like, look, there's that 20-something that's so cool! You know, like that really awesome visitor that you get. And I think we sometimes feel like we're that museum piece, like, yes, we got a 20-something today. We are cool! We need to view it as, how do we get more and give them a community like we've done for young marrieds, people with children, any age group that you could think of.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. We have spent time here at Zumbro over the last year talking a little bit about the changing landscape of the generation that you're a part of, and culturally what's happened. David Kinnaman is a researcher who has done extensive work looking at 20-somethings and how they fit in with the life of the congregation or not. He's identified that there are 3 general categories that people in their 20s tend to fit in. They're nomads, which means that they still identify themselves as being Christian, but they've kind of wandered away from the church. That maybe sounds a little bit like the category you might fit into. He identifies a group as being prodigals, people who have consciously and intentionally left the faith because they have experienced something that is completely discongruous. It's not a place that's welcoming. They don't feel that God really exists. And then he talks about exiles, people who really have a deep, growing spirituality, but that spirituality is developing and lived out completely separate from the life of the congregation. It's much more of an individual relationship with maybe someone that's named as God or Jesus, or maybe just that concept that there's something bigger out there. So without feeling like you're a spokesperson for the entire generation, although you can be right now, tell me a little bit about how you see young people and spirituality and faith, either from your own experience or from friends that you've talked with along the way.
And this is a topic that comes up a lot. I have a very, very good friend who was a PK, pastor's kid, and experienced frustration by the church when they brought in new ideas that wasn't in line with their, not even theology, but just what they wanted to do as a church, and they were treated very negatively and basically asked to leave, and that was so hurtful. This happened during her formative years. It was when she was maybe 17. And as a result, she hasn't gone back. And we've talked about this because she knows that I want to come back to church and I want to find a place. But she doesn't. She's done. She is done. She's not coming back. Her husband might come back, but he's good with supporting her with where she is. I think that's one reason is when new ideas are brought forward and they're squashed. That's a really difficult way to come. Another friend of mine had trouble finding, she put it, her kind of people at church. Because you can join a small group or a Bible study and you can have those conversations, but if you don't feel a connection with people, that somewhere you have something in common, it's really hard to have deep, intimate conversations about faith and what you believe when you think the only thing you have in common is the fact that you both had, 3 o'clock free on Wednesday to meet for this small group. And I think especially when you're in your 20s and you have all these questions, not to say that you don't in other areas, it's just, like the first time that it kind of all blows up, you can feel so separate and lonely even when you're surrounded by people that you don't want to experience that again.
So tell me, what do you think you would need most from a church? What would it be that would make it feel like this would be a place for you? Zumbro maybe in particular, or the congregation in general?
I think this is something that Zumbro has done well. My parents came when we did an adult forum on our Tanzania trip, and they said 3 or 4 people talked to us while we were sitting here. This is such a friendly place. So I think Zumbro has a good amount of that down already. I think the trouble comes after the service, when you leave and it was like, well, great, you came, maybe we'll see you next week. I think it's about as simple as having someone to sit with. If you don't feel like you have anyone to sit with and you're just sitting by yourself in a sermon, can you learn? Of course. But part of church is community and learning together. And when you feel like you're in this pew and you have the appropriate amount of space, you're not sitting too close to a stranger, you just feel separate and you know that you can leave without talking to a single soul. And that's really, really lonely when you see people in the church that already have groups and friends that they talk to. So I think what Zumbro, and I know is a focus, needs to do, and I've heard this said before, if we just get all the 20-somethings together in one service, they saw how many there were, they would definitely come back. I think it's about making it more visible that we have people struggling with the same things in the same age group. Here's a picture of them, you just gotta find them. Just showing that they're really here. Even a series, oftentimes our series is on marriage or children, having a series that related more to 20-somethings and 30s, that's what they're dealing with. Service activities, projects, and that's something that, again, that Zumbro does really well. but specifically not only advertising them, but inviting. I know I've been invited specifically because they know that I love doing service projects. Understanding who your audience is here at church, and then not just sending them an invite, but saying, we want you to come do this with us. Especially since there is a strong passion here and in the 20-somethings for social justice and doing things instead of just talking. I think that is something that would make the church stronger and something that I'd want to be a part of.
Okay, so community comes from shared experience. It comes from intentional conversation. It comes from serving together. It comes from growing deeper. Honestly, you have time for all this?
Yeah.
I mean, really. I mean, that's.
You make time for what's important. If you want a certain group to come to church, you provide food. I don't care how busy you are. If there's free food, you will get the college kids, you'll get the 20-somethings, you'll get everyone. The people who don't want to cook when they go home for their family. You can make time for what's important. So if I feel like there's a chance for me to connect, there's nothing more valuable right now to me. That would become the top of my list. And if someone said, hey, you want to go to a movie? Nope, I'm going to church because I have a place there. And people love me there. And it's not about just being like, I'm going to sit in a pew with 5 other people my age. It's the feeling that's frustrating is when you think, oh, it's intergenerational, but it's only because of me. I'm the only one under 40 in this group. And that's where you feel more like you're the requisite, like in high school when you had to have one girl on your team, which really bothered me. Like that's sort of how you feel.
Well, we don't want you to be the only girl on the team. And yet I think that that's part of the challenge, finding a way that intentional community is difficult, and yet it's an opportunity that as a congregation, we have people of all ages in this room right now to try and meet one another and get to grow a little bit stronger, a little bit deeper together. There's a great quote by John Ortberg, who's a pastor out of California, and he says, God never grows 2 people in the same way. So if you think about it, you've been in this wilderness area wandering. How do you think God is growing you? Or do you think that God is growing you along this way?
I have no doubt that I'm being growed right now. I think that my concern comes from when I don't see it necessarily maturing into anything like growing up, but is there going to be a little flower on the top if we want to go with that analogy? I think it's important that everyone grows in different ways. My friends who I felt had it all together, had their job that they went to school for and loved, and it was in the church, those voices reach those people. But mine will reach people who didn't have that experience. I definitely feel like I am growing, but I just don't feel like it's specifically for a purpose for God. Like, can I help people? Yeah. Can I communicate better because of what I've learned? Yes. Am I stronger than ever before? Oh my gosh, yes. But is it for a calling or a purpose of God? And that's the question. Why? Who are you doing it for now?
Do you think that makes a difference to you? Feeling like you could name it as a calling versus just something to do?
Well, it doesn't matter what you call it, but I remember asking a friend in college when I was having these doubts, I said, who cares? I was like, Chad, does it matter if I do good things for God, or if I just do good things because I want to do good things? And I'll be really honest, I don't remember his answer except that yes, it was important to make that distinction. And I think it is because we're here for things beyond this life. And you can't take anything with you. And if the services you're doing are just for a basic, general good, it's really easy for that to kind of slide around and for you to lose perspective. I think it's important to have a focus, and I think if you're a Christian specifically who's made a commitment and said, I want to be in this relationship with you, I believe you've died for my sins, then that is a commitment you've made and you need to honor, even when it's incredibly difficult.
Makes sense. Okay, so talk a little bit about what it's like to be in your 20s. It's been a while for me. It's been just as long for the people out here. What kinds of things bring you joy? What kinds of things, what is your outlook on the world? What are you looking for?
I found a piece of paper from from middle school youth group, and it said like goals this year, goals 5 years, goals 10 years, and I think it was the 10-year goal that like hit right now. And under it was college loans paid off, done. find friends, nah. And the other one was have life job, meaning have the job that I'm going to hold for the rest of my life. And I just laughed. I had a friend with me, and we just laughed at how idealistic that was, thinking that we would know where we wanted to go. And I think that's part of what's shaken me up, is I thought that I would be in a very different place. I said before, I'm working at Mayo Clinic, but I thought I'd be in a church. I thought I'd be a pastor or something very similar, or a speaker on women's issues. You know, I didn't think I'd be here. So there's a lot of doubt in your 20s. What did I do wrong? Or, oh, this changed. Why did it change? A lot of overanalyzing. You know, you keep hearing like, oh, when you get to your 30s, it's so much better, and you just think, gosh, I hope so. You worry that college was the best time of your life. You worry that high school was the best time of your life, and that really freaks you out. But it's a time where you almost feel like you're reinventing yourself, but you don't have a new identity to choose. And that's also very nerve-wracking. When there's honesty and authenticity, I think your 20s can be a great time when you learn that other people feel the same way. I don't think there's a greater connection than realizing the person next to me thinks the same thing, and we're going to get through this together, and we're going to learn from it and grow from it and help other people from it.
Okay, I don't have it all figured out. You feel better?
Yes.
This is good. This is good. So often we tend to define ourselves by what we do. And I think you're not alone in wanting that life goal, life job, that sense of identity. I also remember reading a statistic not long ago that the average American changes careers, not changes jobs, but changes careers 7 times over the course of their life. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's true? All right, so what do we do with that? If so much of our identity, yeah, you're on number 3, there you go. Only 4 left. If so much of our identity is tied up with what we do, then how does that affect who you see yourself as being when things don't work out?
That's one of the biggest discussions that I've had over the last year, especially with my parents, that they view jobs as they didn't fill your soul, they filled your stomach, gave you money, buy food, survive. My generation grew up, and in many ways rightly so, and unfortunately so, as an entitlement that you were going to get a job that fed your soul and your stomach. And so for being told that the college degree was going to do everything for you, you're going to find a purpose, you're going to make a difference, it's really heartbreaking when you go out and think, oh, like this is not what I want to do, I don't believe in this at all, it's just a job that I need to do to get my loans paid off, and then I can look for my dream job. But then you kind of get swept into the whole, well, I'm here, if I stay here a few more years, you kind of get pulled into a corporate world that you always said you were not going to do. You were going to find your own thing and do that. I think there's pros on both sides. I think what my parents say is very true. You have to take jobs and learn from them, regardless of whether or not they fit into your idea of the ideal. I think there's something to be said, though, to do those jobs well. Learn from them and still go after what you want. And I think that's been one of the biggest back and forth discussions and debates that I've had.
Sure. Sooner or later you've got to eat, right? Find a place to live. You can't live in your car or your parents' basement forever. Hopefully. So, all right. So the job struggle, trying to figure out who you are and how you can find meaningful work has been one thing. Tell me a little bit about your relationships. These college friends along the way, have they been your community, or has that changed too as you've moved back to Rochester?
There's one friend who's just like, we've been out of college for 5 years. No way! We talk like we are still living 20 feet from each other. So a lot of those college friendships have lasted and have been a community because they're going through almost exactly what I'm going through. And when you have your feelings validated, whether or not they agree, but just say, yes, I can understand how you would feel that way, oh, that is community. That's a place that makes you feel safe. So a lot of my community has come from that, and unfortunately that's phone calls. None of them are in Minnesota. A childhood friend, the gal who is not going to go back to church because of her experiences as a friend. But it's really difficult to find friends who share a similar value-based structure, like I don't know, there's a lot of like, let's go to the bar and drink. I'm like, that's not my scene. So it's hard to find friends and community. I found it a lot though, in people not my age. When I went to Tanzania, that was just, it was fantastic. You meet people who you might not have noticed before or thought like I could be friends with them, or travel to a country and have all of these really crazy, intimate, weird scenarios with. But community for me, a lot of it's been my parents. And I don't really like to admit that because it kind of sounds like a little losery. But that's really where I found community. It's been difficult to find new friendships that where you have enough in common that you feel like you can share personal things.
I want to talk a little bit about Tanzania because I remember you and I having this conversation a year ago, a little more than a year ago, and you're thinking, can I even do this? This is so far out of my comfort zone, and I'm not sure I'm ready. And then you finally decided to just jump in and go on this trip. So talk a little bit about what that experience was like in terms of helping you grow and some of what it was. I'll let you do the pictures if you want.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of it was, Jason also got roped into this, and I remember meeting him, and he's like, you just sound like you want to go. I said, well, that can't be enough of a reason. Like, I need to figure this thing out. A lot of it was friends saying this would be a great opportunity, and a lot of it was listening to them and not my fears, because, I had just I listed the fears that I had of going on this trip. And when I talked to Shelley, I said, I don't know if you're okay with me coming, because I'm not going to church regularly, I'm not praying, I'm not reading the Bible, I'm mad at God. Can I even come with you? And I was told I could. And it was about, we set up the expectation of going that you don't go in expecting that you're going to have a life-changing experience, because then anything below that, you're just going to be disappointed. So it was go and learn as much as you can. And I think in the back of my head, I thought, God has got to reach out to me in Africa, or I've got to have a breakthrough, because hello, it's this huge trip. We're going to places we've never been before. This has to be the time. But that didn't happen. I grew a lot, and it is the most valuable thing I've ever done. I'd go back tomorrow. There's an informational meeting this week if you want to go. I highly advise it. But I definitely learned a lot about myself and grew a lot and got over a lot of fears and decided those weren't going to dictate my fate. Learned, sadly, how much need there is and how little it feels like we do sometimes, but we can plant those seeds and start. But I didn't necessarily get the spiritual revelations that I thought that I might on that trip. But that doesn't downplay anything or any of the reasons that I went.
Were you hoping that God would speak to you when you were there?
I was. I have learned that I learned through travel. Going to a friend's wedding this weekend in Ohio, and it's like Ohio, but I'm going to learn so much. I'm going to meet people I've never met before. I learn when I'm in new places, so I love traveling. And I was a big believer in church camps when you were little. Those were big deals. They had the campfires and the Who Wants to Come to Jesus this week and Who Wants to Recommit. Those were huge, big, feely, for anyone who's a feeler on the Myers-Briggs scale, like those are just it. So I was expecting it, and when I didn't get it, it was a surprise.
So what did you do?
I cried to Jason. I talked to him about it. But what I did was I said, all right, I've learned these two things, and I'm going to bring these back. And it was about not being anxious about time and something else, which should come to my mind quicker than it is right now. So I took lessons that, while it wasn't specifically related to God and becoming closer to Him, were still healthy and important for a young adult or any adult or any person to know and do.
So maybe setting that bar, like you said, when you go into something with these great expectations, God will do this, God will say that.
Right.
Then sometimes that reminder that God doesn't always work in those ways we expect maybe creates a little bit of a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we were talking last week, you started to, you used this phrase, you said, sometimes I've come to learn that you have to put God up on the shelf. So talk a little bit about what that means to you and where you're going with that.
That's the most uncomfortable thing I want to share with y'all. Actually, it was my social work prof in college who said, I went up to her and I just said, look, I believe everything we're doing in class. I've never wanted to help people more. my heart has just been ripped out and like left in the curriculum here because what we're talking about is so important, but I don't feel anything towards God, and I'm so ticked off at him. And she said, oh, I still remember where I was standing in the room. She said, sometimes you have to put God on a shelf. And wow, I was not okay with that because that just sounded so wrong. And it still sounds wrong to me, and I'm not even comfortable saying it as a, take this lesson away, here's your takeaway from Ashley's thing, put God on a shelf. But I think what can be taken away from that is maybe let go of some of the shame and let go of some of the guilt of what you feel when you're not as close to God. Talk about it, don't let it become a really shameful point of your life. So I don't know, and I don't like not knowing.
Yeah, that's a scary place to be. So imagine then, you're my kid, and you're telling me, I mean, I'm a firm believer, and you're telling me I'm not sure God is where God is in my life anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What's the most helpful thing that I can do for you as a parent, or as a grandparent, or along the way?
I have the best parents on the planet. My mother is specifically gifted and talented in emotional intelligence and knowing the right thing to say. Because I would yell at her and, oh man, I'd be like, you're so dumb to believe this. How can you believe this? Like the things you can only say to your mom that only your mom will forgive you for. And she said, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. But I am not going to let you think that there's no hope for you and that God has abandoned you. And I know that you can't believe this now. So I am going to believe it for you. And she has continued to do that for me through today. Whether it's about God or finding a new job or finding friends or something that's come up. But what has helped me when I don't have faith in God, where I find my faith, is through his followers. And it's through those people in my life that love me, regardless of how unlovable I feel for having these doubts and fears. It's them saying, I will believe it for you, and I'll stick with it, and I'll stick with you until you believe it yourself.
Yes. I think we all could use people who can believe things for us along the way at times. So is that where you find hope? Where do you find hope?
That's where I find hope. Sometimes it's through other people. I've gotten better at, I was very dependent at the beginning of this, especially when I was still sick, on other people giving me that hope or getting encouragement, and I realized in order to grow, you need to start doing this for yourself. You need to like when those little babies and you have to let them cry in the crib and self-soothe, like I needed to do that for myself as an adult. So it's something that I've learned and grown and done, but when you get down to the wall and when you panic about sharing something at church that you never thought you'd share, like you need to reach out to other people. And that is where I found hope. It's very difficult to find in other places, like people's personal stories, like, well, I had this experience, but then God came and made it all better. And in my head, I just think, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me. So for me, it's those people saying, I'll believe it for you and I'll stick with you.
I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions to Ashley before we do a little conversation amongst each other. Anyone have something they want to ask or a comment they want to share?
We got to know Ashley in Tanzania, and Ashley, I can tell you that you're welcome to sit with us anytime.
Thank you.
One of the things that I got thinking about is that Julie and I have friends at Zumbro that aren't our age, that are maybe older than us. And even somebody that's 50 years older than you is really looking for people like you to make them understand the youth, or not necessarily understand it, but enjoy the youth. You know, they remember back when they were a kid and all the things that you're doing that they thought were fun to do or whatever. And my comment is that not only looking for people your age, but there's a lot of friends that aren't your age that are looking to develop a relationship with you. So I would say don't limit your search for friendship to just people your age.
I completely agree. One of the reasons why the Tanzania trip was so valuable to me. The concern and the loneliness that comes from is when you're continually the only person your age in the group that has those same feelings and concerns. Because it's easy for conversation to focus around what the majority is dealing with, and sometimes you're not. But I wholeheartedly agree, and I think flipping it, like they're looking for that youth or remembering what it was like. I think that's a wonderful point and something that 20-somethings can not just ask for from the church, but give. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alicia. Just to let you know, I'm a 20-something, so yeah, we can hang out sometime. Not for much longer, I guess. I'll be 30 in a year or so. I just want to say that I'm a mom of two, and I was a mom at a young age. So I felt very disconnected from people my age. And I remember that thinking, they have no idea what my life is like. They also shouldn't have to because they're not in the same position as me. But I did find comfort in people that were older than me. There are lessons that they learned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't get better advice from people that have gone through the things that you're about to go through, you know. And so I think that's something like what he said. It's okay that you're not necessarily friends or communicating with people just your age. Learn from everybody and their experiences. Take in what they have to say to you. But also I wanted to say that my mom would always say, God does not work in our time. When we want to know, why is this happening now? What is he going to do with it? My mom would always say, look back at your life. Look at other times you struggled. How did it work out? How did it pan out for you? And I can honestly say, every time I look back, I can see how it took the time, but God really worked in it. Because once I truly allowed him to work in my life, it was unreal how much it can unfold, but we can be so stubborn and we can hold on to that and think, you got to do it now. Just remember, it doesn't always work that way, but you do have people here to talk to, okay? So thanks for sharing your story.
Thanks. That quote from Soren Kierkegaard that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, life is lived forward but understood backward,
Yes.
often becomes a great lens.
Ashley, it's great to hear from you. So kind of maybe a couple of comments and then a question for you. One comment is, I think that your generation really does struggle. Your generation is growing up at a time when the economy is in recession. And so the sort of mythology that, we don't ask kids, the question that you hear growing up all the time is, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And your generation really has not had the same opportunity to move from your education into that sense of career, because the openings weren't there, a lot of industries weren't hiring, and it's, I think that's very legitimate frustration that you feel and a real legitimate difference in generational outlook. There's also kind of this mythology that there's this calling, that your job as a young person is to find that calling, that God has this purpose, and that you just, your job is to uncover the purpose. And I think part of maturing is to realize that that's a load of hogwash. Your purpose is discovered by looking around, going, well, here I am. Where am I, and what can I do? What do the people around me need? The question I would have is, many of us in this room grew up going to church because you were supposed to. And even in our 20s, we kept going to church because you were supposed to. What's with your generation?
No pressure.
Second that one.
Oh, I prepped for this, and yet I don't feel prepared at all. I think it's because I don't necessarily think it's healthy to go to church because you're supposed to. Now, I am not saying that that's a reason to not go to church. I think, and in some cases, authentic relationships and real growth with God happens, but I think when you go to church because you're towing the line and you're just supposed to be there, doesn't result in what it would if you were going because you wanted to grow and you wanted to be in community. I wish there was a little bit more of I'm going to go because I've made a commitment to do this and I'm going to stick through it even if it's lonely and uncomfortable. I think the reason why my generation, and again this is coming from me, doesn't go is because there have been a lot of ideas brought forward that are new, and churches aren't comfortable with making those changes or considering new ways of doing things. And then when you feel like your voice doesn't matter or they're not willing to do anything differently, then why go? Why go back to that place that pushed you away? I think that can be part of it. But I surely wish that there was more of a, I'm going to go and give this a shot, because goodness knows 20-somethings take risks all the time, so why not make one of them church?
I think church as a risk-taking activity is not something we normally advertise at, but we can go for it.
New campaign.
Hi, thank you again for your talk too. I just wanted to comment that we had a miscarriage when I was in my 30s actually, and I was very angry with God at that time too, because it had been an unplanned pregnancy, and yet then by the time it was like we're excited for this child, and then it didn't happen. And my head nurse at the time actually told me it was okay to be angry with God. And I think that was one of the best statements that I could have had. And it led me to a number of talks with God there. And it took a while to get over that, because I thought we could have given this child a lot of love in life and that too. So I think, at all ages, there are times sometimes that you do have that, and God is big enough to accept our anger. And I think that was what she had said too, and that part of relationships are sometimes you are angry with each other, but that doesn't take away the love that's there.
Thank you.
You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. And you gave a talk before you went to Tanzania.
Yes.
And I talked to you later, and I was so impressed with you. I knew you'd do well. So just hang in there, because things will work out.
Thank
You got a
you.
wonderful attitude.
Thank you. And I do remember you. You gave me quite a bit of hope. Thank you.
Yeah, you were so good.
Ashley, my wife, and I have the good fortune of being in the same small group as you on Tuesday night. You must have some wonderful parents, because how in the world does a 20-year-old, 20-something woman or man get to be so articulate and so positive at that age? I'm amazed. You could be a poster child for Dale Carnegie, for goodness sakes.
That'd be a good job opportunity, actually.
Thank you, and I consider it a great honor. I'm looking forward to Tuesday night.
Like Mike, Ashley, you can sit by Suna anytime you want. Although we're in the choir, so you might have to join. You talk about maybe not seeing God.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've learned all my life is you've got to look for God where God might be. And I was there when that picture was taken.
Yeah.
And I see God in you. And you may not see that yet because you're still 20-something. But when you get older, you'll start to learn how we see God in other people. And in pictures like that.
It occurs to me that in this room your experiences are not unique to being 20-something. Especially when looking for your calling. There are a few people in here who haven't been affected by job loss or questioning what's going on in their life. I don't think that's unique to being young. All of these career changes are often not by our own choice. When you are young, you don't know what jobs exist, so it's impossible to make a lifelong decision. And in our economy, jobs change so quickly that the job I'm going to have 10 years from now probably doesn't exist right now. That's one comment. And the second comment I have is, to me, faith, and I've had arguments with somebody in this room about this, but faith doesn't just come as a gift. God doesn't come as a gift to me, speaking to me as a gift. It comes through practice, and faith is hard work and a kind of a discipline that it may exist separately from practicing religion. And I think it's a mental, sometimes a practical discipline that when there are times of disbelief that you just have to work through in order to get to that place. And I think maybe the practice is the whole point.
Thank you.
I know, Ashley, one of the things we talked about, and I'm hearing this coming through, a theme you say that's important to you, and I think is important to many people in your generation, is that question of authenticity. And it can be a real challenge to be authentic, especially when you come to church on a Sunday morning and you've got 2 seconds to say hello to the people sitting around you and greet them in God's name. That's not where you can dump all of what's happening in your life, or the struggles you have, or the fears, or the joys. It really takes a lot of intentional trust, like you said, learning to speak and learning to listen. And one of the challenges I think we have as a congregation is to both find opportunities to build that trust so we can hear from people about what they're going through, but also being willing to take those risks ourselves and say, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm not quite so sure what I think about that. So that as we're on those journeys together, we discover we're not the only ones who don't know what we're doing with our lives, or whose children drive us crazy, or who feel really lonely even when we're sitting in the middle of a crowded sanctuary. And along the way, maybe that's how some of that community you talked about comes to play. And maybe along the way, that's how God starts to work in each of us as we build one another up. I want to say thank you for your time and your story, and thank you for